welcome back to another episode of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, the show where we talk about a bunch of the other stuff that nobody on other marketing shows talks about, including our wonderful topic for today, which is marketing accessibility. And so you're probably thinking, what is the conversation about marketing accessibility even about? I don't really know. And if you know me, you would know I don't really know what's going to come out of this conversation either. But the point is put a whole bunch of smart people in a room who know a lot of things about accessibility from a lot of different perspectives and have a conversation about how this is relevant in the world of marketing. Both because marketing exists of people who are marketers and also people who are consuming things. This is a people game. And in order for us to play a people game, we need to have a people conversation. So this is what we're here to do today. And you will see a whole bunch of lovely guests who are joining me today. And although it might look like a conversation for just, yeah, it's you too, Dan. You're included in that. While it might look like a conversation for just these 5 talking heads that are on your screen, it is a conversation for everyone. So if you are joining us live, get into chat. If I could slap people through the computer, I would do that because people are always like, oh, I love your show. And I'm like, I didn't even you weren't in the chat. So at least tell us that you're there and watching in the chat. But specifically, if you have an experience with accessibility from a marketing perspective or from not a marketing perspective, or you've experienced something that has been very difficult for you from an accessibility perspective, specifically when it comes to marketing, but in any other arena, we have some wonderful experts in the room to have this conversation and be helpful today. And I think they have a whole bunch of sneaky tools in their pockets. So also, if you're looking for tool recommendations from a marketing accessibility point of view, please ask those questions in the chat because this is where you come to get the answers or where you come to get more questions. Depends on how deep we need to go today. Suzanne, welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for the wave. And if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to pop them in there and we'll bring them right on over. All right. So before we get into the chat, because my mic is going in and out. How is it now? Is it still doing that?
As long as you're not moving or getting too noisy, like escalating, it seems to be okay. But otherwise, it cuts you out.
You've met Tracy before, right?
Yeah, that's not going to be a thing.
That's why I kind of said, maybe this is the
We have our lovely guests introducing themselves. I'm going to fiddle with my audio settings. So let's start with Carole Jean. Carole Jean, tell us about yourself and why accessibility is so important to you.
I'm Carole Jean Whittington. I'm the founder of Whittington Wellbeing. I'm a late identified autistic ADHDer who is also dyslexic, and I have an auditory processing delay. I am really focused on accessibility, especially during burnout, because how we process information, how we read it, how we hear it, how we take it in, no matter what that might be, changes from moment to moment. So accessibility during burnout is very important to me.
Awesome. I don't think I'm on mute, but I also have another screen up. Sydney, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney Elaine Butler, and I'm the founder of Accessible Creates. So accessibility in marketing, accessibility is super important to me because making sure that everyone has access to what you're providing and making sure that everyone has an enjoyable experience or interacting with the world around them and being able to access resources that they deserve. And so that's why I'm passionate about accessibility.
And Sid recently spoke at the UN, which Carole Jean recently shared about, which is just very exciting for all of us, which is why I'm sharing it. So round of applause for Sid. So excited to have you back on the show. Diana.
Hi, I'm Diana Dimmock, and I am the founder of Accessibility for Everybody. Accessibility is really important for me, simply because it has to be all about equity, right? People with disabilities are already here. They're already experiencing the world. It's not about inclusion anymore. It's about making sure that they have the same access as everybody else.
Which is something I know that you and I, fun fact, is my microphone sound any better or does it sound the same?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds better? Okay. I turned off the auto adjust thing, so maybe that's helpful, hopefully. I grew up with an aunt in a wheelchair, and it was always like so surprising for me that places she could not go because she couldn't use her legs. And it always seemed weird to me. So I'm like so happy that there's so many of you doing different accessibility efforts for different ability types. Love it so much. And last but not least, the most famous talking head on this panel, Dan.
Diana, you got me thinking, because that phrase, it's not about being inclusive anymore. That's something we may have to touch on, because that's a really interesting concept. My name is Dan. I've been lucky enough to be working with Tracy for the better part of 4 or 5 years. I am ADHD, language processing disorder, which means I don't always, I know what I'm trying to say up here, doesn't always come out here. So when you see me looking up, I'm basically trying to picture what I'm trying to say before I say it. I'm also an autism dad and do a lot of work within the space. I want to set the tone right away in saying that when we talk about neurodiversity, when we talk about differences and superpowers that people have, we need to get out of the habit of validating. So my hope is that during this session, nobody feels the need to justify what they're trying to say, validate what they're trying to say, and they could speak openly and freely and understand that there's an acceptance understood within the parameters of this call and within the audience. So let's try to be conscious about that and go from there. And Carole Jean, I swear you age in reverse. You look better every time I see you. I need whatever's in your coffee, or Irish coffee, or whatever.
You mean the stuff I just spilled all over myself on live show?
Okay. All right. So I just because it came up in the introduction with Diana and Dan, you echoed it. Let's talk about the differences between inclusion, equity, accessibility. What are some of the things we need to understand from maybe a vocabulary perspective while we get into this conversation? So does anybody want to go first?
I'll go first. I think that inclusion at its core is the fundamental of that everyone deserves to be included. That equity is that, I think there's a lot of confusion between what is equity and equality. And equity is really ensuring that everyone has a piece of the pie that they need. And then accessibility is making sure that everyone has access to rooms, spaces, environments, resources. And so that's kind of a very simple, high-level way of explaining those three things.
No, I think that's a great explanation, Sydney. And that's exactly it. Inclusion is definitely an amazing thing. But I think the difference with the equity part is that it's not bringing people into the picture, because they're already there. Whether or not people are acknowledging them, they're already there. And people with disabilities need proper representation, and they also need accessibility in all things, including marketing, and especially with online content. One of the things that I always think about is, do you have image descriptions for any of the images that you put on your website? If you put it on any of your marketing material, have you included an image description in the font underneath? Because a lot of the times, anyone who uses a screen reader is going to need an image description because they cannot physically see what is going on the web content. And so I think that's a great way to make sure that things are accessible, especially when it comes to marketing.
So, okay, I want to, you guys are ready to go with me to a controversial place, because I know and trust all of you guys. Earlier today, I was having a conversation, and it we were on a screen share. She was not sharing her camera, which I was that's your prerogative. But something that came up from me from an accessibility point of view is that, so for me personally, I don't identify as having an accessibility issue of sorts. And so it's not top of mind for me. And one of the conversations we were having, when she has an app, and she's like, oh, I try to put the image descriptions on, but I just don't think of that, right? It's just not something that I think about on a day-to-day basis. And I do think that accessibility is more top of mind for people who are experiencing the lack of accessibility. So I'd love to hear from all of your perspectives, because different experiences here. What are some things that you've seen are helpful, or that you've coached people on, that allow people who don't have that as part of their experience on a day-to-day basis? How I am a post-it note girl personally, so I have a post-it note that's like turn captions on. But like, what tips do you have for people who want to do better or improve in this arena, but just don't think about it that way today?
Just a quick clarification, Tracy. You said accessibility is more top of mind, but compared to what?
So, I'll use a marketing example, right? So, a lot of times from a marketing perspective, a goal is to post something. So, our goal is to post. The most top of mind thing is to put a post on social media. It's not top of mind for us to make sure there's an alt text description on there because the goal is actually to just post it, or the goal is to show up and record a video, or the goal is to whatever. So, I believe that this is like to some degree a priorities thing. And I would love to say that everybody's top priority is accessibility, but I just think we would all know that that was lying.
Well, can I mention one thing because I think it's so this is important when we're talking about neurodiversity, when we're talking about disability. When it comes to the way the brain is made up, I want to be very careful to when we look at using language like priority or forgetfulness, because for large components of the neurodiverse and disability community, it's not a matter of being purposely forgetful. It's the way the chemicals in the brain operate. It may be one of the things where it's go, 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 go. I got to get this done. And then it's one of those retrospective things where we're like, oh, we should have paused because we should have done this, 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 and this. And I feel like that's important to bring up in the context of this conversation because it isn't always about, and this is part of the problem overall, but it isn't always about the intention. People often will look at the result and not look at, well, what was the actual meaning behind it? And that's where a lot of people in our community get stigmatized. So I just want to be careful with and provide that context as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think this is why this is a complex conversation, and it's not as easy as saying like this is the right answer and go to town and make that work, because you don't. I would say I still think in our current hiring environment, there are a lot of people who try to hide neurodiversity. And so you might not even know if there's something like that is impacting the people who are creating the marketing. And then at the same time, we have what we would generally consider from a marketing perspective, like our brand guidelines, right? We have our brand voice, we have our brand guideline. This is what we do on every post, right? So like these are the types of things that we do. And so it's really not as easy as saying like, just put this in your brand guidelines and you'll be able to do it every time. Because that's why I asked the question, to be honest with you, because I wanted to open up the conversation so that we could talk about it from the different perspectives.
So I don't think we can go any further until we talk about the whole purpose of this conversation, the why of accessibility.
Absolutely.
I don't think we can do that till we talk about it first. And why, from my perspective, why is accessibility important? Because everyone has a preference in how they access and consume information. Regardless of your neurotype, your ability or disability, physical and, or otherwise, every person has a way that they need to access information, and that is not always the same. However, when we are talking about accessibility and the features and the different variations in accessibility, we also have to talk about who. Are we being inclusive of who? So first of all, as marketers, who are we talking to? Who is our market? Who do we need to make sure can access the posts that we've created? As disabled creators, there are limitations sometimes to my energy, to my auditory processing, to how I can type or put in information if it is late in the day, if I'm having a really just tough day and my dyslexia gets really bad. That is much harder for me to add the things that I normally would like to. So sometimes I will post to the best of my ability, and then I will go back and add things when I have the ability to do that. So I think we got to talk about a lot of those different layers when we're talking about accessibility for who are we talking to, why are we talking, and who are we as marketers and creators as, disabled or not, and what are we doing for our own accessibility in the process. There's lots of tech tools, and I think when we're talking about all of this, ultimately what it comes down to in my world is, how is that helping you or hindering you in your energy management to stay out of or get out of burnout?
I'd love to talk about the point that you brought up about priority, Tracy. And I think the thing that a lot of people don't think about is when you're creating content and you're creating marketing or any kind of thing like that, how effective is it if it's not accessible, right? So how many people are you actually reaching if it's not accessible? If you're not including image descriptions, if you're not including captions, if you're not including all of those things that expand your market to different groups that are already not being included in those conversations, they're already not being included in those ways. And I think that's why it should be everyone's priority in my experience and in my opinion. Because if it's not, are you really like getting the full effectiveness of your marketing at that point? Does that make sense?
Well, I think absolutely. And I mean, the thing about marketing in general is that we know we're only ever talking to a segment of people, right? It doesn't matter how many views your Super Bowl ad gets, that ad only speaks to specific people. And so from a brand perspective, there's always been this underlying conversation about this is accessible to some people and not accessible to some people, even if it's just based on you've experienced this or you haven't experienced this, so you will get it or you won't. I always think of that. I think it was a Bud Light commercial with the golden retriever puppies a few Super Bowls ago, and it was the biggest thing, and I was like, oh my gosh, I remember having a golden retriever puppy. It was so cute. And so I remember that ad because I have a personal attachment to that. That does not mean that everybody has a personal attachment to that, nor that every piece of marketing is going to be able to generate that. And so I think the deeper conversation, the behind the marketing scenes picture that I'm hearing from your share, Diana, is that do we care that we might be leaving people out? And if that's this group of people, are we willing to do something about it? Right? Do we want to make this accessible to people who might be using an e-reader? I remember actually, I think it was Carole Jean the first time who was like, you could turn on transcription on Zoom. Do you want to do that? And I was like, yeah, I do. I didn't know how you could do that. And so a lot of times it is just because it's not, as I mentioned before, top of mind. So it's not even that I don't care about that if I actually took the time to go into this and have a conversation about it, but it's just that I think marketing has followed our society's general track of do more, right? Just do more, just post more things and have more ads and have more views and more, send out more emails. And in so doing, we lost all of our time availability to have these conversations about oh, wow. Okay, do we actually, as a team, do we want somebody do what we have? I mean, I don't know. It probably depends on your product, right? If you have a virtual reality thing that's based on seeing, then maybe the people who can't see aren't your target audience, and it's not the most top of mind priority for you in terms of accessibility. But even having the space to have those conversations is where we allow ourselves to say, to get ballsy enough to say, we don't care about that from a business perspective.
And I think the caution with that is that if you don't care about it, then keep in mind that the people that are wanting those things and that are looking for those things are not going to be interested in your company. They're not going to come in and they're not going to be part of that as well. And that's definitely everyone's obviously choice. I think the hard part is that going back to that priority bit is if you don't have time, then it's not a priority, right? And when we're trying to communicate with so many different people, we just need to make sure that we're doing that in a way that everyone can access that, if that makes sense. I think with like what Carole Jean was saying with about all the technology stuff, that's one of the beautiful things is AI and a few of those other things are starting to make those things a little bit easier for communication in some ways. I like to use Goblin tools when I'm having a really hard day with making sure that it sounds professional. They have like a little Goblin tools that has a little formalizer that you can just plug in what you want to say. It pops it at the bottom and it's in a formal way of speaking. That way that if I don't really have the energy or the time commitment to think about how I'm going to do an image description, I just simply plug it into there.
I have something to add.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because Dan is still thinking. You can tell.
No, I'm not. I'm not thinking. I wanted to go over to Sydney. I'm trying to figure out what's appropriate for me to say. Over to you.
Okay. So I think how you talked about segments, Tracy, and how there's different oh, it's a 25-year-old man that lives in Alberta that's white, and having that very specific target audience. But then when you realize that in order to increase greater accessibility, and why would you not want to make your marketing tools and your branding to have the greatest access? And it's like, did I do everything I can? Because I don't know what people are going to need from this. Are they going to need the closed captions? Are they going to need the alt text? Did I do all I could to make sure I can have the great access to get all the segments that I'm trying to reach? And I think there's this disconnect that people with disability are separate from the, it's like, okay, we have LGBT community, we have the disabled community, but with the disability community, it overlaps everyone. I'm biracial, and have disabilities, and I'm queer myself, and I have all these different intersectional identities of who I am. And I can't get rid of any one part. And so I think when you try to silo people in marketing, that's when the real issues come about, and just to be able to have these conversations and have those diverse perspectives. It's like, okay, I did all I could. And to Carole Jean's point, she has to take care of her greater accessibility. She's like, I don't have the brain capacity. I have I get the same way sometimes too. I'm like, my brain fog is so bad. I had to make this post. I want to get it out there because I've rented a week. But again, come back to it later. That your intentions are good, and and understand that when you're marketing, just be authentic in your approach too. And I think that helps increase greater accessibility.
Yep. And I want to throw in just a number real quick. So for those of you who maybe you don't identify within the disabled population and you're in marketing and you need a why, I'm going to give you a why because this is going to serve my population. So my friend Edna's over on YouTube watching because I'm streaming to my channel there. And she was sharing, hey, I don't feel like companies are really even speaking to me. In the United States alone, the disabled population has a disposable amount of income in excess of $500 billion. $500 billion. So if that does not get you on board for accessibility, I don't know what else will.
I love the contributions with everybody. I'm having a little bit of a difficult time because there's a lot of different ways that I try to look at things. And fundamentally, and I'm just going to be very direct, there's part of me that disagrees with you, Diana. And the reason why, and what I'm trying to wrap my head around, and this is the reason for my pause, is there's so many assumptions that occur in public when you put out something. There's assumptions that are made in marketing materials. There's assumptions that are made by the viewers and the readers. And yes, I believe everything should be as inclusive as possible and accessible as possible. Where I sort of have a difficulty is making the assumption that somebody is not prioritizing accessibility if for whatever reason they missed the boat on creating those captions at some point, because we don't know what's going through that person's mind. We don't know if somebody is just doing everything that they can. And for instance, I was involved I was a project manager for clinical trials. Well, let's take MS. Nobody looks at MS the same way. So visual representation on MS is going to be completely different from person to person. So they may be spending so much time focusing on one aspect of it that by the time they get to creating the metadata and those other details, you make, they're just too tired. And should they go back and edit? Yes, but should we be stigmatizing for and saying that they're not prioritizing? That's a different story. Now, if they keep doing it, then I 100% agree. Then that's a fallacy within the philosophy, and that is a deprioritization. But I have to be very careful about the context in which we have these conversations, because at some point we have a very real risk of offending somebody that doesn't deserve to be offended.
Well, and I think this comes back to the complexity of it, right? Because in my mind, and if anyone disagrees, I'm always happy to hear it on the show, because this is about new ideas and new perspectives. That one, in marketing, mistakes get made, right? Stuff goes through 3 levels of proofing and then is still wrong. And you're like, how did that happen? I don't know about you, but sometimes I see a TV commercial and being like, really? Proved. I don't know. We're still humans doing human things, and humans have our own limitations. Even I have approved things that shouldn't have been approved because I'm trying to move too fast. There's a variety of different reasons. So there's always the human component. When I think about intentions and priorities and things of that nature, I always think it comes back to, are we talking about this? Are we talking about this as part of our marketing conversation, or are we not talking about this as part of our marketing conversation? Because if we're not talking about it as part of our marketing conversation, we're probably not going to get lucky and just be accessible. Okay? We likely have to do some different things that are outside of the norm of how someone is using LinkedIn or Facebook or video processing to do those things. So have we had the conversation? And this is why I bring the conversation to the show today, because if I don't control whether every business everywhere wants to have the marketing accessibility conversation. But if you do want to make your marketing more accessible and you are not having a marketing accessibility conversation internally, again, you're probably not going to just get lucky and have it happen for you.
Yeah, if you don't
I
mind,
look at it like, let's assume good intent, right? Because I think we get caught in that when we can't open a conversation is when we're not assuming good intent, because then we go in with these emotions and this preconceived thing, and then people tend to get really defensive, and then they're shutting down and they're not open to hearing new things. And so, one of the things I love people to assume good intent from me. I don't always deliver things in the best way. I have the best of intentions, but if someone assumes good intent and says, "Hey, Carole Jean, can you kind of tell me what's going on here?" Sid and I have had this kind of conversation before about assuming good intent, because that happens a lot. Sid, I bet you got some thoughts on this one.
Real quick, Diana's been trying to speak for a little bit now.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just gonna say, I'm not trying to come across as like you have to do this or you're a horrible person. That's not at all where I'm coming from. The thing that I'm thinking about is that by making it a priority and by making it something that you do think about and that you do include in, that is part of learning about how to increase the accessibility of things, right? This is a learning process. We're all learning. We're all going to be changing things as accessibility things go on. And it's not you're not, if you're not doing this, it's not good. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that let's try to start making this a priority so that we can make things more accessible, so that we can make things more easier to access for people, so that we're not unintentionally leaving people out. And the beautiful thing and the hard thing about accessibility is it's so diverse that that's a goal that may 100% be unattainable to make sure it's accessible for everyone. That's okay. But the main thing I think is that when we hear feedback from people, when we think about who we're interacting with, I think we really need to make it intentional that way of, okay, I want to make sure that when I'm speaking and I'm saying something that I think is really important, whether it's marketing or whether it's a brand message or anything else, is that can I include as many people in that as possible on the accessibility standpoint so that they're feeling like I'm speaking to them as well. Kind of, I can't remember who had mentioned that earlier, but someone had said, a lot of people feel like they're not being even talked to. And people with disabilities, that's a big thing that I've heard from a lot of people, is that they don't even feel like people are treating them like human beings. And that is so sad and so disheartening. And that's one thing that I really want to put forward with my intentions, is that I really make sure to be inclusive as possible so that I'm not unintentionally making someone feel that way, or my marketing or whatever I'm posting is making someone feel like I'm not thinking about them. If that makes sense.
It does. Sydney, can I say something real quick and then I'll turn it over to you? Is that okay? And I want to be very clear. I wasn't taking what you were saying in a negative perspective. I think for me, one of the things that we talk about neurodiversity is a lot of people that are neurodiverse are very sensitive, and I'm one of them. And I know how much effort I go through in trying to think of every single person out there when I'm creating content, when I'm setting something up. And when I make mistakes, which I make more than my fair share of mistakes, whether it's called out or not, I'm self-aware enough to know how hard I take it. And because of that reason, when I'm having these conversations, I have to be very careful for the sake of the audience to put that in context and make sure that nobody's inadvertently feeling like they're being isolated. So it's not about necessarily the message. It's about how do we receive that message and how do we provide that message. But the actual context of what you were saying, I 100% get and I 100% agree with. It's just, for me, this it's a bit touchy because of that. It's I don't want people to get hurt.
Yeah, no, and I completely understand that. I think for myself as well, because I'll be honest, I'm neurodiverse as well. It's not that I haven't made mistakes where I haven't put in the image descriptions and, oh, I have to go back and do that later. I think the thing is that, okay, that's still in the forefront of my head though, that, oh my gosh, I forgot. Okay, I'm gonna go put those in right away so that the people that can see this that haven't already seen it are still able to access that information. And I think it's giving yourself a little bit of grace with this because it is a learning process.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the biggest points here, is this concept of learning, because I do think a lot of times, especially from a marketing perspective, people don't risk trying things because there's like a brand consistency thing that they're trying to maintain, right? So I either have to be able to confirm that I can put alt text on every single post, or I'm not going to put it on any post, because what if I do it once and then people are going to get like brand confusion? And this is the thing I always think is really interesting on the branding front, because branding is the experience people have of you. Okay? They either get the feeling from you that you care about accessibility, or they don't. But there's also, like, I think a lot of times, especially in marketing, because we are trying to maintain brands, that we don't want to look like we're learning publicly. And so when we do these types of activities and we make a mistake, there's the opportunity for us to look like we're learning publicly. And where I would, from a brand perspective, be like, yeah, my brand is all about learning and growing. So I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. And I'm going to forget to put captions on things. And I'm going to try to... Luckily, Carole Jean could answer Diana's question today about how she can get captions on StreamYard, because I didn't know that. Right? And now I know that, which is helpful for next time. But I didn't know that. Again, now I know, and now I can and do better. But this is, I think, it's anything around like accessibility, neurodiversity, especially when it is a priority or it is important to people, they don't want to get it wrong. And I think, like, Dan is asking an interesting question here too. How do we do that without coming across as placating everybody and just trying to be like, I'm everything to everyone? Because none of us are that either.
But I don't actually believe that's placating. And sorry to jump in. That's not placating. In fact, respectfully, I don't even like the use of that word. Um, I'm gonna stop there because I know like that sort of triggered a little bit. So I'm gonna give it to Sydney.
I feel like I have so much to say now because you all made really good
We
points. So I'm
talked
going to
about
go
like
back.
8 different things, and now it's
And
to go over all of it.
when am I supposed to remember it? I'm also neurodivergent, so my brain's going to explode. No, but I'm going to add to Carole Jean's point about good intention because this kind of touched on what you all talked about. I think as long as you are open and honest and try to make those good intentions is the key. Understanding, and things are always coming out in the marketing world and the branding world, and with accessibility, it's both two of the most fast changing spaces to be in right now. And so again, giving yourself that grace and being like, I'm learning, I'm catching up. For example, with camel case, when you do hashtags in a post, making sure that if it has more than it has, for example, if it has 2 words, having both those words up, the first letter of each of those words be uppercase. And I still struggle with that sometimes. I'm like, oh, dang. And then I go fix it, because I'm still like, and because I'm so used to still doing lowercase in my branding. But I'm like, no, I have to be intentional with my approach. And again, that good intention is like, I'm trying to do better. And, reaching out to people sometimes like, hey, this is the case about camel case. And just, I think, again, it boils down to having that conversation, being able to be vulnerable with people, being like, oh, thanks for letting me know. Oh, I see that you did this. So again, like Diana said, being open to that feedback, trying to provide the greater accessibility, but sometimes you can't see all the little minute accessibility issues. That's maybe impossible. And so yes, as long as you have a good intention and you're willing to modify, and I think, like you said, Tracy, but we don't want to look like we're not perfect in the branding world and the marketing. And I think it just, because that's not our brand. But even, and people realize, I mean, you keep doing it continuously and you start making these changes, and I think people sometimes think, oh, well, I have to go back. Maybe you can go back and change those posts to make it more accessible. Just picking it up one day and now making it a new standard in your branding, and people are going to pick up on that. And so just be patient with yourself and just come from a place of good intention, and being willing to be vulnerable and have these conversations, I think, is a huge step.
Yeah. I love what Reginald is sharing here about how grace maintains momentum. Like if we get to the point where anybody is saying like, oh, we made one mistake, just forget this. We're not going to practice this anymore. You'd never have any professional athletes. And then what would you watch on TV?
I had that, and I had to extend my grace to myself this past week. So I sent out a reminder, and I said, hey, RSVP to this particular link in this program, because I had set up all of these automated reminders for everybody, so it would be easier. And it was supposed to like give them the thing for the calendar and send the text reminder 30 minutes before and all this kind of stuff. But I didn't realize, because it didn't happen the time I used it before, that if the event had started, that it would no longer send it to anybody. So I had all these people sending emails, and I wasn't in my email because I was in the live teaching the class, right? And I was like, I got off, I saw the emails, and I was like horrified. I was so upset because I was like, oh man, I was using this tech thing trying to make life easier for everybody, and it just made it so frustrating for some folks because of the parameters. So I just had to own it. And I was like, oh, heck, y'all, I am so sorry. I had the best of intentions. I was trying to do this. Let me make this right. Here's the way that you can access the stuff so that you don't have to jump through any hoops. Just here it is. And I think a lot of times, just as Sydney, to your point, it was so good. I mean, we just like give ourselves grace, but then also just own it. If it didn't go well or somebody gives you some feedback, kind of like what Diana was saying, just own it and just take the next step, because it is an evolutionary process.
Okay. I have to go back to this point because, sorry. Here's the reason I was triggered. Placation is done typically with the connotation for avoiding conflict for selfish reasons. Inclusivity and accessibility is not placation. That's all I'm going to say.
And I think this is the interesting thing, because like I don't know the dictionary definition of placation, but this is, again, why I think it's important to have these types of conversations, because we can use words like that and assume that we are all saying the same thing, but it can mean one thing to one person, or one thing in one conversation and a different thing in another conversation. And it can be like, these are the types of words, like they don't come up in like a values conversation, right? We're talking about values, we're talking about cares about people, and we're talking about these types of things. And there's enough problems with how people bring corporate values to life through marketing, which is a conversation for another day. But when we don't have the space to have these conversations and to have someone have and be like, wow, I don't, just give me a minute, because I'm like totally triggered by that word. And I need to just figure out like what it is about that that's making me feel this way. Like, it's actually one of the things that I love about these kinds of panel conversations, because this is how group conversations happen in real life. And you have a mix of people who have different neurotypes and different skills and different expertise and different knowledge. And unless we're creating the space to bring out these things and be like, wow, like, I didn't know Dan isn't like a plant in the audience asking questions that I told him to ask. We're like, I didn't know we were going to get that question today. And now other Dan on the screen learned something about himself, and that means to him, or what it, and it may mean something else to you if you're watching. I love this comment here from Reginald. Language is so delicate. And we think it's so simple, right? We think, and again, that's why I wanted to start with definitions today. We use terms like accessibility. And from a marketing perspective, I think about things like, I also have an aunt who's disabled, so I maybe have a bigger realm of that definition, but I have multiple definitions for that same word. So if someone from a corporate perspective says, make this accessible to people who are blind, I probably would like go and see like, what are the tools, what are the options that I can do for that group of people. And then I stop there and I don't think about like, oh, but is this being accessible to all people? Like, what about people who can't hear? What about people who can't type a response, right? Like, what about, I think about this a lot of times from my grandparents' point of view, because they're in their 90s. They did not grow up with technology. Now people like me just expect them to text. Grandma, stop calling me. Just text me. Right? And she's mostly deaf, which is why it's very difficult to have a phone conversation, because she can't hear what I said. I can hear what she said, but she can't hear what I say. And so it's I think that is the power and the opportunity in having the conversation. And I want to share, because Dan, thank you, Dan, for sharing his perspective of placation as being diametrically opposed to authenticity. So
There's
if
that
he
word
was,
again.
I mean, I love the word authenticity.
I know you do.
Yeah. How do we message this while ensuring authenticity? I think that kind of comes back to, like, if I can answer the question, because I would like to deem myself the queen of authenticity, is doing, my definition of authenticity, for anybody who doesn't know, doing what you would do or say, doing or saying what you would do or say when you would do or say it. And it actually creates the permission for all of the things that we've talked about. Right? If you're thinking about putting alt text, put alt text. If you forgot about it and you think about it later, go add it. Right? That's actually authentic. And so it's not that I'm trying to, I don't know. Again, I think we're language adds complexity, which is frustrating for some people, exciting for other people. I think this is like a fun journey through language. Carole Jean, you're sharing a tool in the chat. Would you like to talk about that quickly so that people can hear as well?
Yes. So there is a phenomenal new tool. It was just approved by the FCC and it is free. And it's called Nagish, Nagish. Tomer Aroni is one of the developers of this. He has ADHD. But this is a tool, and Tracy, this would be great for you and your grandma if somebody facilitates some tech for this on her end. But you can have a phone call, an audible phone call, and it translates into text without having to have an individual relay the message in between. So this is actually ensuring more, and it's incredibly accurate and ensures more privacy, and is an incredible accessibility tool.
This is
amazing.
What I need.
I was going to say too, I love that, Carole Jean. Like I said, even with the Goblin Tools Formalizer, using all of those different tech elements that are available to us now makes a lot of these things a little bit easier. It can make it more accessible for people, like you said, who have energy, capacity, need, or like differences. But also, like, don't be afraid to reach out to people who actually do this for a business. Don't be afraid to reach out to the rest of us if you need accessibility added to your marketing, if you need accessibility added to your website. One of the things that I think about a lot is, do you have like descriptions of what kind of washrooms you provide in your business on your website? Do you have accessible washrooms? Those kind of things. But don't be afraid to reach out to the people who are already doing this and already are thinking about this, and especially people with disabilities, because when we're already aware of these things, it makes us aware of the other disabilities that we may not have as well. Kind of that beautiful thing of, once you're in the community, you kind of become aware of all the other things that are maybe barriers. And don't be afraid to reach out to people who can help you with that. It doesn't have to be you. You can definitely outsource those things as well.
Just be careful. And I say that because, and AI is inherently biased. So especially with language used, and I come from a place of working in anti-racism and that kind of thing. You want to be very careful. Like, don't make the assumption that the tools that you're using are the be all end all. Do your second and third checks. Make sure that you could stand by anything that you put out if you are utilizing those tools, because just to give an example, from the deaf community, people assume the ASL is the same everywhere, but ASL has language differences, just like anywhere else, based on region and different things. So you want to be really careful that you're speaking to who you want to speak to. And then this is a totally another conversation that we can't get into based on time constraints, but also be aware that visual representation looks different for everyone. Somebody sitting in a wheelchair that's wheelchair bound may not want to be seen and be represented by somebody in a wheelchair. They may want to be represented by what they actually do and what actually makes what they feel is their UVP. So be aware of these contextual elements as you go into it. And what Diane is talking about is, but what I'm talking about, what everybody here is talking about, is really how you fit together all the pieces of the puzzle, which ironically, the puzzle is not seen as being inclusive in the autism community. So, hey.
A quick point
layer
about
of complexity.
a quick part about AI. I think it's such a powerful tool, but also you still need that human element, because I feel like some of the AI tools I've seen. I also have a co-lead for Toronto Disability Pride March. We have an annual march local to our community, and really understanding the local disability community within us. And so sometimes we use these tools, but we have to double check, because it doesn't actively represent disability voices sometimes. And it sometimes, you want to make it sound more professional and make it sound in the formulas, or for example, that Diana mentioned on the Goblin tools, but sometimes it loses some of that voice.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of the things that I just want to like kind of wrap this up in a little authenticity bubble is that it's not right or wrong to use any of these tools, right? If Diana feels like her energy is maintained by using Goblin tools to sound more formal because what she's trying to do needs formal sounds, then great. If you're trying to speak directly, more authentically to the community because you feel comfortable in doing that, you don't have to do that. And I think a lot of times when we see these types of tools, we start to think we should use them, right? And even trying to kind of going back to Dan and the audience's question about how do we ensure authenticity, my question now is like, is that what you would do? So Diana would use Goblin tools for this. Sydney would use or not use a tool for this, right? Like, and that's what authenticity actually is. It's not about everybody looking the same. Authenticity is like the complete opposite of everybody looking the same. It's about us looking like our unique selves and embracing our unique abilities, which are innately different. Like Carole Jean kicked off with, right? It doesn't matter if you identify as having accessibility needs or not having accessibility needs. All of us are different. Our brains process things differently. Our bodies work in different ways. Like all of this is different, and different is not bad. But the point from a marketing perspective today is that are we taking our differences into consideration or having conversations about them from a marketing perspective? Okay, that was supposed to be my wrap up, but then Reginald snuck in with a question. So we'll see if we can throw this in there quick. Lots of disabilities have another side to the abilities that are heightened and not always understood. There are hidden potentials there. So we'll leave. This will be the last thing we do. So final thoughts, everybody, on taking or creating space for hidden potential. Diana, you can go first because I know you have a hard stop, and then if you have to sneak out, you can.
You know what? That's a good thought. I'm trying to figure out in what context that they're talking about.
Yeah.
But as far as I think about it, when I think about, like, let's say for example, my ADHD, like the benefits of my ADHD is that my ability to hyperfocus means when I'm interested in something, I can make it happen. And that's really useful when it comes to creating content sometimes. That's really useful when it comes to doing research. So if that's the context that they're talking about, that would be kind of what I see. So don't forget that disabilities aren't just the things that people can't do. They also, there's a flip side of what that perspective allows them to do better, actually, sometimes.
Agree. How about you, Dan?
I mean, Diana really sort of hit the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned. What I would say is that granted, I'm not exactly where I need to be right now, but I wouldn't be where I am without accepting that those things that growing up I wish were different are actually things that help me be the person that I am. And this is the difference between you using the word authenticity. I just say, hey, this is me, raw, real, whatever. And it's great. Look, everybody has everybody has their idiosyncrasies. Everybody has their comorbidities that make things difficult. Not everybody's going to have a great time all the time, but everybody has the potential to be Carole Jean Whittington.
Or to be yourself.
What's great is, like, as ADHD, when you're in a thought and then you lose the thought, you could just plug somebody's name in, and I made the right choice.
I mean, who doesn't want to be Carole Jean, right? Awesome, Dan. How about you, Sid?
I think I agree with both Diana and Dan. They both nailed it on the head. But really understanding that, again, the intersectional piece. Someone is so many different things, and their hobbies they enjoy, the TV shows they like, what they do with their family, what they do with their friends. And so just realizing that we can't, like Dan said, we can't have all good days. We'll have bad days too. And just, allowing for that space to have someone show up as they are that day.
So good. All right, it's you, Carole Jean. Wrap it up.
Let's not fire hose one another with sales offers and the latest, brightest thing. Let's actually slow down, have a conversation with one another, meeting each other where we are so that we're most comfortable to connect heart to heart. That's accessibility.
And you make it sound so simple. And if only more marketing took positive intent and conversations into consideration, then maybe we could get there with
But
marketing.
it is simple.
It is. I mean, conceptually, it is.
No, not even conceptually. It's from a simplicity point. Like if we look at this overall, and I'll make this as quick as I can. Nope, not again. Not nudie. Nope. You're not dressed. Hi,
This is real life, folks.
Hi,
Real
Brookie.
life.
I'll be right there. Like, Jesus. Okay, Brooklyn, can you say hi? Go get sister. Get sister. Daddy will be like literally 2 minutes. Get sister. Don't pull her by her diaper.
If you're not watching now, both of the twins.
When we talk about anti-racism, when we talk about all these things, we talk about we talk about social construct. When we remove the boundaries that the social constructs provide, it becomes very clear that humanity is at the forefront. And when you start focusing on that humanity, all that BS that piles on top, that's where we sit. And that's where Carole Jean's going. That's where Sydney's going. That's where Diane is going. That's where you're going. That's not where Tim Sweet is going, but I had to throw my Tim Sweet reference. That's where we need to get back to, because it's been centuries since we were able to provide a clean slate that everybody deserves to sit on. Peace.
And you can do that with your marketing, folks. We're not just here having this big philosophical human conversation. These are things that you can bring to life in your marketing, in your businesses, in your social media interactions, like all of the places, if you want to. So if you do want to, look at all these amazing faces on this panel today. Please connect with them. Connect with Carole Jean, Sydney, Diana, and Dan, and have a conversation. What does that look like for you to create more accessibility in terms of your marketing or in terms of other areas of your business, if that's what you're looking for? And don't let this be the last time you have a conversation about accessibility. If this is the first conversation, let it be the first of many so that we can all bring more accessibility into the world. Thank you, Carole Jean, Sydney, and Dan and Diana, for so many amazing tips and tricks today. Reginald, Dan, who else do we have? Edna, and I'm missing one, right? Suzanne in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Wonderful comments. Thank you for adding what you did today to the conversation. Let's stay in conversation together. And until next time, everybody, permission to do you.